Hi, it's Nick. I'm making something today. I'm cooking. And I'm cooking something called omokguk, which is Korean for fish cake soup. It's a very Korean dish, and it's amazingly refreshing, and it's great to eat alongside soju, which is the processed rice wine that they drink in massive amounts here. Actually, it's the best-selling alcohol in the world. Hait, Jinro, Chamisu, soju, yeah. So this is something you'll typically find in a pochang matcha, which is a kind of a tent pub, which I showed in my previous video. And yeah, it's really delicious. So if you ever come to Korea, I recommend you to try that dish as one of your priorities, especially with alcohol. You're not going to be disappointed. So yeah, let's cook.
Let's talk about the ingredients. I actually bought all of these ingredients from my local store, my mart, as they call it in Korea, but you might be able to find most of these in your own supermarket, or if not, maybe in a Chinese market or an Oriental store or something similar. The first thing you're going to need is soy sauce. Basic, just any soy sauce will be fine. And then you're going to use some dried anchovies. These can be big or small, doesn't really matter, it's just for flavoring the broth. And next you have a Korean radish, which is daikon in Japanese and mu in Korean. The next thing is just salt. Fine salt is better, I think, for flavoring soup. This is called dashima. Dashima is basically kelp, like sea kelp. I'm not sure exactly where you could buy it in Europe or America, but probably in an Oriental store or a Chinese supermarket. These are just wooden skewers that we're going to use to stick some of the fish cakes on. Very common. This is the main ingredient in the dish, omok or odeng, and essentially it's a fish cake. You can get it in lots of different sizes in Korea, and I'm not 100% sure if you can even buy it in other countries, but there are some great recipes online which I will link if you want to try and make it yourself. It's very delicious, and it's quite soft and has a texture kind of like a soft cake. Finally, we're going to need a single onion. Just a regular white onion. The final things you're going to need is a soup strainer, like one of these. This is one I found in Korea, but you can also use a cheese sackcloth as well, or anything similar. Also, you're going to need a pretty big pan, a big pot. The first step will be to wash your vegetables. This is me washing the radish. It's pretty dirty, so you make sure you give it a good wash. I was filming one-handed, so that's why it's very awkward watching me try to clean something one-handed in the sink. Yeah, just get a good scrub, but it's not so important because you're going to peel it anyway or cut off the rind with a knife. After that, it's time to chop the radish. So the reason we're going to cut the radish up is to try and get the maximum amount of flavor out when we're creating the stock of the soup. Now, the stock of the soup is basically just boiling hot water with radish, onions, the dried anchovies, and that's just, oh, and of course the kelp. So here I'm going to cut the radish into quarters, and then I'm going to cut each quarter. I'm going to take it and I'm going to cut off the rind, the hard skin. Don't throw it away because you're going to need it. We're going to use that to also help flavor the broth. Make sure you get all of the skin off. It's very important because if you want, you can eat this during the dish. Chop them up into about 1-inch cubes. And then put those cubes into the soup strainer so we can separate those very easily from the stuff that we want to throw away after making the broth. And cut all of the radish that you need. Try and fill up the soup strainer as much as you can during this process. Next thing we're going to do is chop up the onion. You want to chop it up into fairly small parts, but it doesn't really matter so much considering we're not going to eat the onion, we're just going to use it to flavor the broth. So I'm just going to cut it into halves, remove the skin, cut it into slices, and then slice those slices one more time horizontally. Finally, we're going to take one sheet of dashima. If you don't have sheets and just small parts, you don't have to rip it up like me, but if you have a sheet, make sure you rip it up nice and small. Next step, we're going to fill up the pan with cold water. We're going to use cold water because we want to bring it to the boil with the ingredients in it. Put in the radish in your little strainer, put in the radish like this. And then put in the rest of the radish as well. As I mentioned before, we don't want to throw away the leftover pieces. Now we're going to put in the onions and the dashima, the kelp. And make sure it's nice and evenly spread around the pan. Turn on the hob to a very high heat, and then we're going to slowly bring it to the boil.
Cheers.
After about 20 minutes, it's boiling very nicely. And there are two things that you can do during the time when it's boiling. The first thing is to prepare the anchovies. So I'm just going to generally take a couple handfuls. I don't really know the exact amount. The recipe I'm using suggests 2 large dried anchovies, but considering I'm using small ones, just grab a handful, whack it in the microwave, and then heat it for about 1 minute to 2 minutes. I'm not exactly sure why we do this, but the recipe calls for it, so what the hell. Then after we've microwaved it, we're going to whack it into the soup, and we're going to boil that for another 20 minutes with the lid off. It's time to prepare the fish cakes. So now this is the stage where we try to make it beautiful. And I have these giant, clumsy, ogre-like hands, so as you can see, sticking things onto a small stick is not exactly my forte, but I think I did an okay job. And what you can do is, if you have the big thick rectangle ones, cut them in half and create the little fans, like by folding them over and sticking the cocktail through each side. Or if you have the long cylindrical ones, do like this, where you just stick it through the middle. It doesn't really matter how you do it, to be honest, because you're just trying to make it look good at this stage. You don't even have to do this stage. You can stick the fish cakes directly into the soup, and it will still taste just as good, omitting the sticks, but it's not really a big deal. If you're a presentation person, yeah, spend some extra time. What I'm doing here is I'm removing all the big chunks of radish, fish, and dashima, because we're not going to eat that. We're going to throw that away because it was just for the stock. So strain it as best you can. We finished making the stock now, so we're going to add some salt and soy sauce. For this recipe, I think I used 1 or maybe 2 spoons of salt, but be careful, make sure you taste it after each spoon of salt, because you don't want it to be too salty. You want it to be perfect for your own palate. I recommend using a little bit less salt and a bit more soy sauce, because that really gives it a unique flavor. So I'm just going to stir in the soy sauce, give it another little taste, and then yeah, it's good to go. Okay, we're gonna add the fish cakes and bring back to the boil for about 10 minutes, and then we're ready to eat. So enjoy. I hope you enjoyed this video and that maybe you'll somehow try the recipe. It's really, really delicious. I can guarantee you that I've made it many times, and even some Korean people have said it's delicious. So there you go.
Okay. Final step to enjoying your meal. Come there. All right.